So let us start now. Thank you very much for joining us, students at the Tokyo University of Foreign Studies Global Studies Department, as well as overseas students at the Graduate School of Global Studies of Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, mainly from African countries and so on. And then I would like to say that thank you very much for your presence. The representative of Iom Japan, Mr. Mochizuki, together with today's special guest colleagues from Ukraine. But this is a very great honor for us to welcome Mr. An Gwen, who is a special envoy for the Ukraine response and the chief of mission for Ukraine International Organization for Migration, IOM. IOM is a well-known, prestigious UN agency handling humanitarian as well as development aid. And on many capacities, I've been getting along with IOM, and we are really benefiting from our engagements with IOM in many circles. And for you, for students, there are some students who graduated from this university and now currently working at the IOM, some parts in the world. So beyond your imagination, IOM is highly relevant to your future career, I would say. But this is a very great honor for us to ask today to Mr. An Gwen to be engaged with us for very candid conversations. We have a rather limited space for smaller rooms, so we only have two dozens or so students at TFS. You are so privileged. So please never waste this opportunity and be frank in asking any kind of questions or comments. But there are some dozens of people who are online who may have genuine interest in IOM's activities in Ukraine or some other related issues. If we can afford, of course, we would like to take questions from the audience on Zoom online meeting. So in such a hybrid manner, we would like to organize this special occasion. Thanking the benevolent kindness of Mr. An Gwen and his colleagues of IOM. There's a brochure of IOM, but I would like to give the floor to Mr. Gwen now instead of me explaining IOM's activities. But this is very much precious, highly respected UN agency. You are more than perhaps you are aware of. So. Taking this opportunity, let me spend 1 more minute. 2 more minutes, let's say. 今出てます？この私の画面。オンラインに。黒い。出てきた。OK. We have launched crowdfunding for the children in Bucha, Ukraine. And if you click on the SNS message coming from HPC, and then you hit the ready for crowdfunding page. これ見えてる？山崎さん。OK. And you can see the explanation, unfortunately in Japanese language, but if you do not read the Japanese language, please check out HPC Twitter or HPC Facebook. We have also provided the English explanations so that you don't get lost anywhere in ready for crowdfunding donation page. And what I would like to highlight is this area. Ms. Etsuko Inoue, who is a graduate of HPC training program in the 2007 year batch, quite a long time ago. She belongs to the first batch of 17-year history of the program for human resource development for peace building, currently working for IOM, and she was in Ukraine for 4 or 5 years until very recently. And then we have a presence of Mr. Akao in this actual room at the TFS. He also provided us with his very much moving recommendation, words of recommendation for our art therapy assistance program. And they understand, I hope they understand the importance of this kind of psychosocial mental health support. And this is highly required in countries like Ukraine. And IOM has been offering many projects in many parts in the world in relation to so-called MHPSS, mental health, psychosocial support programs. the recommendation was from such professionals or professional officials working at the IOM who are very much willing to provide us with words of recommendation because they know the importance of this kind of activity. So please go to this website, those people who are in this classroom as well as those guests who are online. Thank you very much for allowing me to spend some more time advertising this, promoting this art therapy crowdfunding project. And now, eventually, I would like to stop here. He really is really willing to get engaged with us. And of course, in order for us to better organize our conversations, we really would like to welcome his initial statement. Perhaps he is expected to introduce activities of IOM together with his very rich experience, career development in the UN system. So those who are interested in UN, please ask questions on that part too, together with your questions on IOM's activities in Ukraine. So now, Mr. Graham, please.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. It's been, you can guess my age, but it's been 30 years since I graduated from undergrad. And so I was trying to observe to see what's changed. But I know what hasn't changed. Our students are still shy but I guess it's always human nature. So again, my name is An. I guess I wanted just to share a little bit more about Ukraine overall, what the context is, and definitely about what we're doing. And I'd love to share a little bit about my story as well in terms of how I ended up here, and in Ukraine of all places. Ukraine, I've been in Ukraine since 2019, but I was also, this is my second tour. So I was also working in Ukraine from 2005 to 2011. And it's just so amazing to see the country developing in all of these years. Before the war started, there were all of these discussions already, right, about mobilization of troops. Are the Russians going to attack? What's the issue? And a lot of people were really in disbelief. They couldn't imagine, especially after World War II, that there would be another conflict of two European countries after World War II. And I think it really was a surprise in a lot of ways. But we as a UN agency, we had to be prepared. And so even before the war, we were looking at contingencies, scenarios. And I think this is where understanding history and understanding, what happened before really helped, because we were looking at these Kiev Rus scenarios where, where the Russian Empire was at a certain period and what the land structure looks like. And we being IOM, being very what we call proximity based, meaning like we're on the ground. We actually work with our beneficiaries. It helped us to also better understand a little bit about the context of what was going on. And I still remember on February 24th, when I was woken by the explosion. And I just heard 3 explosions right by my house. And by the time I turned on my phone, I already had like 50 WhatsApp emails and everything about what was going on. And there were troops that were troops that were already landing in Gostomel, which is an airport, was a very strategic point for logistics for the Russian Federation Army. There were troops coming in from Odessa moving upwards, and there were already paratroopers that had already landed on the outskirts of Kiev. And it was a really scary time. To think about actual urban warfare on the edges and the periphery of Kiev was quite surreal in a lot of ways. I was very proud, though, of the UN, but also of the team in terms of how they were able to react and mobilize, because we were somewhat prepared. We had already started pre-positioning aid assistance in the West. We were talking to our donors, and our partners about making sure that we had potential supplies ready. And I would dare say, as we were slowly, from a security perspective, moving out of the outskirts of Kiev, we were already starting to position our work coming in. Ukraine had lost at its peak around 20% of its country. Now, you're talking about a very large country. You know, it ranks, I think, 45th in the world in terms of size. And since then, Ukraine has slowly been able to get some of its land back to around 15% now. And you've all heard about the counteroffensive and different things. IOM, we work focusing on what we call IDP populations as well as the broader humanitarian work. So IDPs, internationally displaced. And right now, since the war, depending on the statistics that you hear as high as 8 million people or Ukrainians have left the country. There was at one point already 50% of the population of Ukraine, which is around 40 million to 42 million, had been displaced. We still have around 5 million displaced people, and we had 5 million who've returned from their displacements back to their original domicile. And so this is what we had always said is the largest displacement since World War II in Europe. So we're talking about millions of people and millions of lives. Now, what we were starting to get concerned about are the people who are displaced. We've done studies every month, and now we're doing it every quarter, trying to understand the needs. And the biggest things that we've been seeing, we call them negative coping mechanisms, and they more than 50%, or actually more than 80% now after the latest, have used up all of their savings. And so, we talk about humanitarian needs hopefully going down, but actually, with the conditions that we're seeing, the needs are actually increasing. And what is actually very concerning is if you break it down in terms of gender, the female population end up doing to save more money. They end up going to seek less medical health care, and so then you have kind of issues on top of issues related to that. You probably heard about the dam that was sabotaged a couple weeks back. That also created another issue where you had almost 600 square kilometers of land completely underwater, and it was sitting there for 6 days. So now you have health issues in terms of waterborne disease. You have we were calculating more than 1,050 cubic tons of machine oil that was, because of the flooding, got diluted or was polluting the water, in addition to the landmines and that whole area that is now have been uprooted and is floating down towards unfortunately Nikolaev. And so those are the conditions that we're working with in terms of where it is. And the next part is the winter. We always talk about, maybe you have 4 seasons and Ukraine does too. And at its worst, we end up around -25, -30 Celsius. And last year, we saw the Russian Federation also attacking infrastructure, social infrastructure, especially energy. And so there was a period of time where more than 60% of the Ukraine was in the dark. And unfortunately, we were part of that as well. But luckily, the resilience of the Ukrainian people, the response was amazing, where at this day, the Ukrainians are actually generating enough energy to actually increase and provide energy into the European grid, And so that brings us to more of the recovery part. If you talk about needs, there's humanitarian, the life-saving needs, but really what we've been talking about with the government is how do we start helping with the recovery, the reconstruction. And this is where, I'll move to the next point in terms of what IOM does. How many do you actually, be honest, How many do you know what IOM is, or have you heard of IOM? Ooh, not bad. Okay, great. International Organization for Migration. We are part of the UN family, and we became officially part of the family in 2016 when you might have heard of the Global Compact on Migration. It was a result of actually a little bit of an earlier declaration in New York called the New York Declaration on Migration and Refugees. But we've been working alongside the UN since 1951. I remember our old Director General, DG Swing, in the past, he says, yeah, we were twins with the UNHCR, but somehow we lost our birth certificate. And so, you know, we've been adopted back into the family, but we've been working alongside the UN since then and doing the work. The work on migration is huge. You know, I mean, this is where it's quite interesting because if you talk about climate change, if you talk about conflict-related disasters, if you talk about natural disasters, there's always going to be an element of movement. You talk about economics. You know, I remember from my old economic days. You know, wealth is based on currency, mobility of trade, and mobility of people. You know, and so as countries develop, migration is an essential part of you know, how a country moves. And so what we're doing now, just to let you know, in Ukraine, we're actually the largest UN agency. We have close to 1,000 staff. If I dare be boastful, I think the next largest agency is only around 350. And we do that because we work very closely with our community, with the population that we care for. We want to know what it's like to be on the ground. And this is where I've been very proud of the Ukrainian national staff there, who have been working, you know, since February 24th, almost 7 days a week, and they know what it's like because they're walking side by side with our partners, our NGOs, and with others. But I think the big discussion about why I'm here this week is to talk to private sector and to talk to the government of Japan, who've been steadfast in terms of their support and solidarity to support Ukraine. What does the next step look like? You know, how do we be a part of helping Ukraine to recover? And it's about the bridges. It's about the roads, but it's also about the people. It's about how do we start also building communities or rebuilding communities that really focuses on not just the infrastructure, but the social services, the people, and the economics. Because I think at the end of the day, we're gonna have Ukrainians come back, but I think that they have to have a better understanding of what it means and what are they going to have. Are they going to have the basic services that they need? From an economics perspective, you're going to have, you know, expectations of growth within the GDP for Ukraine. It's going to lead already an estimate of around a shortfall of 5 million people of workforce that Ukraine doesn't have, which means opportunities for foreign workers. But is Ukraine ready to be able to provide the social support? And are we able to help with that process as well? And so those are kind of like the bigger topics. But I think those are the important topics that we should already start thinking about now if we really want to be able to support an effective response to what's going on to Ukraine. I'm going to move to the last part about me, and then I would love to have questions and answers because I think it's more fun. Yeah. So professor asked me to talk a little bit about my journey. And so I'll start when I was 5 years old. No, just kidding. No, but you might tell I have a very American accent. I don't know. I speak very bad. But I was born in Vietnam, and I was a refugee with my family in 1975. And so we were one of the last to during the fall of Saigon. And so it was really funny because I still remember I was telling the story with the team. I was in a hotel in Kyiv, and overlooking the skyline of the city, and I saw the bombs coming in and the lights flashing, and it just reminded me of the last day that I was in Saigon before we left. And we were very fortunate to be part of the program. We were accepted into the U.S. We started in New York, but it was too cold, so we ended up in California, sunny California, and that's where I grew up. And I studied. And for first generation, you don't think about working abroad. My family, my mom and dad said, you study, you get a good degree, you get a good job, and their life is happy, but somehow, I did that. I was in the private sector for almost 10 years, worked for the utilities company, high tech in Silicon Valley, but there was just something that was missing to me. I felt like the more successful I was, the more money I made, but there was nothing there. And so I started looking, what is it? How can I contribute towards a better world? And I ended up doing a mentorship program, and it ended up where it was a program that was working with universities in terms of doing business and ethics and mentorship and preparation for students into the work market. And so they sent me to Ukraine. And the first time when they said, well, would you like to go to Ukraine? I said, where's that? So that's how I ended up in Ukraine. And it was just by chance, by luck that I ran into IOM. And they were saying, hey, we're also trying to help people understand a little bit about this issue called trafficking in persons. And I said, what's that? People have issues with stoplights? I don't know. And so I went, and people talk about I have a passion for something, and it was the first time I understood what it was like, an issue that was so important that I couldn't think about anything else. And so I ended up volunteering for IOM in Ukraine. And then 6 years later, I became the deputy chief of mission. Then I went off and I worked in Vienna in the regional office. I was in headquarters where I was the head of the division for migrant protection and assistance. And then they asked me to come back to Ukraine as the chief of mission. So my journey was 20 years with IOM, and it's very circular. I hope that it's more like a spiral, right? So I'm a little bit higher in terms of my learning and development than just being at the same place after 20 years. But it's been, I dare say that I've been so honored to be a part of IOM. It's a little bit different. We have a little bit of a culture in IOM that it facilitates people who really want to do something. It's a weird environment that actually, if you have a specific passion or desire, you have those opportunities. So if it's working with mental health, or if it's working with the vulnerable populations or trafficking in persons or any of those types of endeavors, you'll find a place in IOM. You just need to step out, take a chance, take the internship, for no money, and hope that you'll find some food to eat, but the opportunities will be there. I was hoping only 10 minutes, but I think it was 20, so please forgive me. So maybe we open up for questions.
Sure, please. Thank you very much indeed for the initial statement. So he has shown some of the key elements, but of course he has got a lot of things to say more, so he limited his time because of your questions. So please ask any questions as regards Ukraine, IOM, as well as careers in international organizations and so on. Anything. Please. Bruno.
What IOM stands for. the position of the numbers you have trained. 1,000 is quite a huge number. And given the environment of what you are operating in, the nature of the conflict that you watch on TV seems to be a bit different from what is happening on the ground. In other words, what is on the ground must be tougher than what we see.
Mhm.
Are all these lives safe? How do you ensure safety of your personnel alongside the different bombardments that are happening around?
Yeah.
That's something that I felt I need to appreciate. Probably you know how you have handled that. But also, I would like to cite out the UN report that has been released, that was released on Tuesday in regard to armed groups and children are armed groups. And Ukraine has been cited in the same way. So over 1,400 children have been affected in this kind of the current Russia-Ukraine conflict. Given the platform, perhaps to mentally boost the minds of people in Ukraine and the huge numbers that are displaced, what specific package do you have for these kinds of children that are suffering? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm trying to listen to the voice through the Zoom. I think that your voice might have been heard by the audience on the Zoom. If the people on the line, if you would like to clarify the questions, please let us know. He asked about personnel safety as well as Iom assistance in children, in particular Ukraine. Yes, are they correct? Okay, so now can I ask for you?
Thanks, Bruno, for the question. Now, I'll start in order. Yeah, we are, proud of that number of 1,000, but very frankly, between you and me, it makes it harder for me to sleep. We're talking about statistics as well. We are counting where there's over 3,000 missiles that have come into Ukraine since the beginning of the war, plus thousands other number of drones. And so, I've learned so much about hypersonics versus, ballistic trajectories versus, all of these things. And we've been so fortunate that there hasn't been any casualties within the UN family overall, the 3,000 staff, and I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I just fear that it's just a matter of time, in a lot of ways. There's a couple comforting things. We're not a primary target. The UN is not, but there's always collateral damage. There's always something that happens along the side. And so we take extra caution for sure. You can't imagine how many, tests we do with check-ins. Just to let you know, we've gotten more advanced because we don't use the radios with VHFs, but so we actually do check-ins with WhatsApp every single day for international staff. We do check-ins with national staff whenever there's an attack, just to make sure. And it takes about 5 hours because we have so many and so much across to be able to make sure that we have it clear. We actually have the largest security team of any mission because of that. We do take risks because our job is to provide essential life-saving assistance to people in need. And so that's unfortunately also part of our job is to take those risks. But we do it collectively with other UN agencies. We can't imagine. I've also learned a lot about armored vehicles and the things that it takes. And so we use a lot of AVs when you get closer to the line of contact. And so we're always on the watch for security. But the thing is, we can only prevent so much. We do as much due diligence as we can, and we also do quite a bit of training for staff. And if staff don't check in, they get a hard time, especially for me. And so it's also important that staff also take the responsibility, understand the needs, We are in the city of Kyiv, for example, though we are a little bit fortunate because the way that Kyiv was built, it was built in the era of nuclear war potential. And so the bunkers are amazing, and all the metro lines are bunker grade. And so our offices are literally just 50 meters from a world-class bunker, but a lot of attacks are also at night. And so we need to make sure that staff are on alert. They understand to go to the shelters, that we have these things called the 2-wall rule. At least if you're too lazy to go down to the shelter, try to make sure you go at least to the bathroom or go sleep in the bathtub. And so you'll see those pictures with those poor children, that are sleeping in the bathtub all night long through the attacks. And that leads to that second question about, I understand that the Russian Federation has been listed, related to conflict and children, and so we're talking about almost a lost generation of children right now. We had COVID, and COVID impacted. We were talking about how many for all of those kids, even my kids, even before the war and before they were evacuated 10 days before the war started, they had a total of less than 6 months since 2020 actually physically in school, and we're not talking about just children at the primary schools, but you had university students. I was talking to a student from Kherson, and she's still studying online, but I said, so how's the quality of education? And she goes, well, the teachers are distracted. We get assignments the first month, and then we're just supposed to do it, but there's really no follow-up. And I just need to get that degree, And so then you're starting to think, what's the quality of education? And this is why we were talking so much about the importance of human capital development, and you see this lost generation in the last couple of years. And that's worrying. And I think that's something that we as collectively as a UN team have been really pushing, and we're making that a priority. And hoping that we will engage also with the government of Ukraine, who also they also know that, to ensure that we try to provide as much mental support, psychological support, but also how do we improve or take a look at increasing the opportunities for children to get the right education, that they're not afraid of actually going to a school, that it won't get somehow, accidentally targeted or bombed or hit. So.
You want to add something?
I wanted to add a little bit on mental health. We've spoken a lot about physical health, the physical health and safety, but obviously for our staff, the mental health is really critical. Our staff are often in awful situations, a lot of stress, a lot of emotion. They see a lot of difficult things, but also we're working very, very hard, 40, 50, 60 hours a week. So we put a lot of emphasis on it. I think the UN is getting better at this. When I first started, I knew more than what but we're growing, we're changing. Now we have access to stress counselors, we have access to psychiatrists through insurance policies, but also we need to be better at being open about mental health. Taking it with our staff, we have flexible needs to support people with their needs to get around their families, for international needs to so I think this is really critical element.
Thank you very much indeed. As you realized, she is from Ukraine, office of Iom accompanying her director. Thank you very much for your contributions too. Bruno, if you would like to do so, well, you may identify yourself. He's from Uganda, studying disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration issues. As regards the aspects of social reintegration, he should be more interested. He should be very much enthusiastically interested in even social support aspects and so on. Okay. I don't necessarily ask you to stand up. But if you would like to come back to highlight yourself, yes, you may come back. But otherwise, I may take some more questions. Shikuru and Lobby. It's okay, but if there's difficulty in getting your voice, I will perhaps summarize what you say. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Which is good, but it seems like the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is still going on. I would like to know what are you doing just to minimize the risk of losing everything you're trying to do? Because it's still a fragile situation, and what we think about the future construction, but to me, it's really the situation is still in dilemma, because you never know when the conflict is going to end. So, like, how do you perceive the sustainability of the effort?
Ability.
The sustainability.
Sustainability. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sustainability of Ukrainian society itself.
Of the reconstruction.
Reconstruction on the side of UN. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the overall context that you feel that the reconstruction will be very difficult at this moment, especially given that the war is still ongoing. So how do we think of the sustainability of our reconstruction efforts on the side of UN, Ukrainian society, governments? Yes.
Can I add?
Yes.
Sure. Please come forward if you do not mind.
So how are you dealing with the current option in this critical situation? Yeah, so that they can to prevent like this slide back on that.
Do you mind describing yourself a little bit? Yourself.
From where? From?
London.
Oh, okay.
And they're dealing with educational affairs so in Rwandan society. So in the
Yeah.
context of post-genocide reconstruction.
Sure. No, very good question. That's always the first question, right? Is it too early? And I dare say no. It's not that we have the luxury not to do it. You have a Ukrainian economy that is being supported by the G7 plus. You're talking about billions and billions of dollars that is being put into Ukraine right now to sustain just their basic budgetary support. That's not even talking about the budget required for the war. And what we just can't afford to, and politically, I don't think countries can afford to continue to pump in billions and billions of dollars when you also have domestic issues. And that's always been the topic. And we're going to probably start seeing more and more of maybe pushback from domestically from some of these countries, especially when the elections are starting to come around, And so we need to how do I call it? Make efficient as possible the funding that we have now. When I was, and so there will always be humanitarian needs, but we could also do things a little bit smarter than just, for example, I always tell the story about, from a humanitarian perspective, you can only deliver water, clean water to a city. But there's an example where since 2014, we were delivering water, the humanitarian community, right, was delivering water to a city for the last 7 years. Why not spend the same amount of money repairing the pipe, or being able to creating a little bit more of an infrastructure system so that it's there. And so it's the same thing right now. I mean, people want to come back. They want to be a part of it. There are certain parts of Ukraine that aren't under this active conflict. Yes, that you've got the ballistic missiles coming through, but in reality, there's still opportunities for people to have livelihoods, for people to contribute towards the community, and to be able to to help towards its early recovery. We were talking about the fact that it might actually be a blessing in disguise. That it sounds kind of weird that half of the electrical infrastructure was destroyed, because now the Ukraine, through support of the international community, is building back a much more efficient system. And so those are so there's life-saving, right? You have to do it, but let's think about how we can do it in such a way that will actually connect towards looking a little bit more forward. And so that's something that I think is important. I mean, when I was talking to the governors, even a month after the war started, they're like, great, I'm really grateful for the blankets, we need your help on this and this, on the humanitarian, the shelter kits, everything else. But how are you going to help me to with the jobs? How are we going to help make people less dependent on aid? How do we help them to feel like they're contributing to their own life, And so I believe that if we start talking about like new approach towards aid or development, it doesn't go sequential. It goes in parallel. And especially in the context of Europe, when you're actually in a developing country, you have a government that is functional, and you have a government that wants to support its citizens. It's not a pure humanitarian situation. So mental health, that's our biggest concern, and it's not just for staff, but it's also for IDPs. We do see some very dramatic things. I had to talk through one of our staff who was there 2 days after Liman was liberated, and there were still bodies and parts on the ground, and it's traumatic, and so we need to really take care. We need to understand the signs. We actually should be training supervisors and managers to see some signs, be able to help. We have one of the largest MHPSS mental health psychosocial support programs in Ukraine, for focusing with veterans and focusing with IDPs and those impacted by the war. But it also, that program, we try to have it looking inward as well, because it's something that I think it's one of those silent but deadly kind of situations that you need to catch early on to be able to help people. And it impacts, domestic violence. It impacts a lot of others, domestic issues. And so we want to try to provide that support for not just the staff, but also with the population that we serve.
Thank you very much indeed. Latif.
Thank you so much. I'm Latif. Hope it's a question. Well, I'm much interested in your education background, because it's important for me to know how your career is connected, how your education career is connected to your current so that I can also analyze ways and how. And then you also talked about protection and mental health, social support. I'm interested to know kind of material activities this encompasses. You have safe spaces, safe spaces either child safe spaces for everyone or specifically for women, and protection sites. What you did directly with community, because it's important for me to know, because I actually had some experience working with some NGO agencies in similar cases. I was working with psychosocial support in my country, save the children, and also child protection issues. So in our context, we had like child-friendly spaces, and we carry out different activities, educational activities, and other games that can help stimulate these children, so that we can identify some child protection. So maybe I would like to know if this is the same case or is quite unique. And one important thing is maybe you can also highlight how people like us can find volunteer in IOM. It's very important. And maybe somebody like me who is maybe interested much in this thing can ask, can you claim an ideal area for doable? Because I speak Arabic, I speak English, and in Ukraine, maybe people speak different language. Can I be an ideal person also to volunteer in such circumstances if there is? So, will your language be a barrier to me? Or I only fix in the context where English is more important for all populations. Maybe it's important for you.
Okay. No, thank you. So educational background, very non-traditional. We were actually talking about it. So I got my undergrad in biology. Now, again, remember, I was moving towards a different pathway. And then when I got into the private sector, I ended up with an MBA. If I could have done it and focused on the fact that I'm going to go international, of course, it would be international relations or political science. But I picked it up all along the way. You know, I still did a lot of studying and reading, but I also felt that the world experience also helps you with being successful. And so that's where I would suggest for you to get out there, you know, and take those chances and experience some of those things. Because for me, I felt like, you know, my background in biology, I was actually, it's a long story, but I was actually a firefighter before, so I was into this kind of emergency mode and understanding the context of some of those procedures. And then my business background really helped to start thinking about some of this economic pieces right now, the recovery. And so I think I was fortunate where I had all of those combinations of education, and then, you know, to continuously learn. I think you should continuously say that what was that quote? The more you learn, the less you know, and take that to heart. And you know, you may be done with your official, or, you know, you get your career, but continue to learn, continue to understand what the context of the world looks like. And I think that would be my suggestion. MHPSS. So we have a lot of different pillars related to that. Yeah. So, I mean, the safe spaces for the children, we work a little bit, and it's more that UNHCR does, you know, and UNICEF, focusing on the children. Our focus has been a little bit more clinical in a lot of ways. And so we're actually working with practitioners, counselors, and we actually have psychiatrists and psychologists. And then we're helping to kind of build the network. We have a hotline, and we're doing it in partnership with the government response as well. The First Lady, Lenskaya, you know, it's her priority as well. And so we do a little bit more of a clinical practice towards it. And so, of course, we do art therapy. You know, we as we work within the collective centers, it's the areas where our IDPs are focusing and are living. And so we try to provide different activities for children and different things like that. But the bulk of our work related to MHPSS is a little bit more on the clinical side of that. But there are safe spaces, you know, and there's some specific for children. There's some specific for women as well, and it's all connected within the broader work that the UN team is doing. And so I would say it's probably more on the UNHCR, UNICEF space when you talk about safe spaces. Volunteers, you know, I would probably say, you know, come, but unfortunately, with the context of Ukraine, we've been a little bit more restricted in terms of bringing in volunteers or different interns because of the security situation. And so right now, what we've been really looking at is more of Ukrainians in terms of trying to bring in and attract. We have also realized in Ukraine, it's more particular, right? You need that language, you know, and if you speak Arabic, oh man, you'll be sought after. So you don't worry about that one, you know, in certain parts of the country. French is also very good. We're always lacking in responses in our francophone countries as well. And so, you know, something to think about if you want to think about a third or fourth language or a fifth language for some of you. I would look for those volunteer opportunities for sure. There's internships that get posted. You know, I think this is great because this is the connection. You know, this is you start, you know, networking among your group. I don't want to, you know, embarrass Kuni so much. We've gone to all of these different meetings, you know, the business associations, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and everyone somehow, you know, there's a staff that graduated the same school as Kunikazo did, and so it's very interesting that the networking that, and I would encourage you to do that. That was a big mistake for me when I was in the university. I didn't know the value of that, so I wasn't a part of the alumni group. I wasn't, you know, I just studied, graduated, tried to find a job. But I think those connections at the universities, your experience is amazing. And so really take the effort to build those relationships now, and look at the websites. Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Last year we sent the South African National Republic. So I think it goes around April, May. So this year around.
Thank you very much indeed for saying that. So in terms of this university's relationship with IOM, he is Mr. Mochizuki. You never forget about him. Representing IOM in Japan. Okay. There are 3 hands. We will pick up your questions and 1 question online. But we really must pick up some questions from your side, the undergraduate Japanese student. You can never leave this room without asking a question. Identify 1 representative at least. But anyway, I know you. I met you at some point, but I don't know your name. Yeah. Okay. Please.
Thank you so much for your presentation. So at the beginning, you talked about how you just prepared operations. So in consideration of how it was like emerging the situation. So, but you had no idea of what will be the consequences. So now you have some consequences. Do you find like your efforts in this, like the preparation you just made and the consequences the situation just brought, do you think like it's very effective, or do you still have gaps to fix? Another question is like about human trafficking department. So you talked about this department in IOM. So I'm concerned because in my perception, I feel like in conflict zones, so there should be a lot of cases about human trafficking. So do you find some in your activities? And if so, how do you deal with it? So, and the last one is about, in my perception, I feel like, or maybe intervention at IOM would be like the factors to determine who should be like receive your like your assistance or something, because I know like for UNHCR they have some guidelines of like who should be called a refugee, So what do you consider in reflection of like limitedness of capacity or facilities you have? How do you like what other factors do you consider to select people who need like special or emergent assistance, yet the whole country like surprised in the complaint or something? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. He asked about human trafficking as well as the way he organizes his jobs in terms of selecting those who need assistances as well as management of projects in a way. Your first question on the projects to buy. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, in terms of our preparation, yes, we were prepared. It helped us in some ways, but the scale was much bigger than we had predicted. You know, let's completely be honest. We still had parts of within our community that didn't believe it was going to happen. You know, and I'll be frank. You know, so when we were having these discussions and I was trying to paint the different scenarios and we were talking about the big scenario, they're like, "Oh, An, you're just American. You know, you're just listening to the thing. It's not going to happen." You know, and so those were some of the things we had to fight against. And I don't think the international community was ready. But what our preparations did was help us to at least get things rolling. You know, we had the contacts. I still remember, you know, we were ready for the evacuation. We knew who our essential staff were. Okay, it ended up that half of the essential staff weren't ready for this type of conflict, and so we ended up with less. But at least we had the list. We were prepared. You know, I still remember in the hotel room I was calling, you know, our partners in the U.S., BHA, and others. Yeah, we're in the middle of ordering all of our materials, our NFIs, non-food items. But do you have anything in your warehouse in Saudi Arabia? And you know, and they were getting flown in, and it was the response. The international response was very quick. You know, so within days, we basically took all of the materials from their warehouse from the U.S. The Canadians were bringing things in. The UK was bringing in things, and it was, you know, and then we were just trying to truck them in from Poland. In terms of trafficking in persons, and I'll try to be fast because I'm mindful of the questions, more questions. Yeah, it's we have a program. It's called CT in Crisis, and we were actually IOM was the ones that were pushing on the global protection cluster to consider this as a sub-working cluster, to be able to always focus whenever there's a crisis. We should always assume there's going to be increased vulnerabilities, which would equal to increased opportunities for trafficking persons. We also know that when we identify it, that means it's too late. There's already a system that's happening, and we're seeing that in Ukraine. You know, and so we've been working with our NGO partners and also with the government to, because there's already a system in place. Now you got to remember, Ukraine isn't completely down yet, you know, so they still have their protection measures in place, especially for trafficking in persons. And so we have, through the system, the referral mechanisms, have identified victims of trafficking that were trafficked, actually, unfortunately, in their host countries, like in some of the countries in Europe. And they've returned, and so now we're providing assistance. 17 million in need. You're right. We don't have the money, the resources, or the numbers to be able to meet everything. And so it is what we call a triage. It's taking a look, and we all have a very, that's why we have the cluster system. We agree on what is the criteria to identify and prioritize those who are in need. And with that, we work with the government to be able to provide the list, and that's how we go about providing that type of assistance. It's a little easier, for example, when you have the dam, right? Because then you know that population that you're targeting, or when we're also focusing on, for example, when a city or a village is liberated, you know, then we come in, and then the scale is small enough where we're able to provide assistance to all. But indeed, we definitely have to, with the resources that we have to have a coordinated and agreed to criteria for that. And so in the country, it's not about refugees or IDPs, it's about the population in need and the criteria of vulnerabilities that would help us to be able to develop that prioritization.
Thank you very much, Didi.
Maybe something to be clarified. So I'm not sure, like I have not seen Ukraine, maybe you might have some information. So I had like a government was calling people, like mobilizing operations to take part in like fighting, like retaliating back to Russia. And if that is so, isn't it like human trafficking in IOM's like mission and objective? If it's reality, you describe it as a human trafficking or it's just responsibility?
In terms of the Ukrainians mobilizing Ukrainians to fight the war, that falls a little bit outside because trafficking is acts, means, and purpose, right? And it's for it's in a situation of vulnerability. It depends on an economic situation and for what purpose, and it's normally defined as economic gain. In this situation, it's not necessary. There's a civic duty of a citizen of Ukraine when called upon to be mobilized and to fight, and that's a completely different law and international norms, which I'm not that smart on. So this is where I wish I took political science, but I didn't. But fortunately, or depending on your belief systems or whatever, as a citizen of a country, you have certain civic duties. What they are is how it's defined within that society.
Okay. Many countries have conscriptions in the end. But Teresa, can you kindly come a little bit forward? Even I may have some difficulty listening.
IOM issues. This is actually my research for master's and PhD.
I hope it's been going good.
Like what?
I have a question, so because of time,
Can you describe what you are working on?
right now, I am working on forced migration. Yes.
In West Africa?
West Africa. Since the IOM has been a lot of help to me in terms of my research, I know what they are doing in terms of repatriation and help and rehabilitation. So my question is this, and even though I focus on migration, I also have a passion for women issues. And so I wanted to ask, how has the war affected women in particular? Because in history and also in African history, we know that crimes committed in terms of war affected women differently than men. So is it the case for Ukraine? And how are women responded to in terms of these crimes affecting them? And one more. Are there any plans for justice after the war? Is the UN looking into justice?
Yeah.
So women's circumstance of women in Ukraine, and then how IOM should feel about justice issues. Can I slightly modify your question?
Yeah.
There are enormous amount of justice-related issues, but how IOM should think of these justice-oriented issues?
Like in terms of really after the war, there was a tribunal.
Yeah.
They are the greatest against Russia.
Okay. Thank you. Women's issues first. It's Ukraine is a very I would dare say very matriarchal society. Now you have to understand, after World War II, there was much more women in society than there were men, and basically the power of the Ukrainian women were the ones that really help to reshape the society. Now, unfortunately, as we've seen with gender issues, they've always deferred themselves to doing the behind the scenes. And so the politicians, you see them as mostly male. But women, I believe, have a very strong voice in Ukraine. Unfortunately, sometimes they defer it. We are working quite a bit with other UN agencies also related to conflict-related sexual violence. And that also kind of refers to your second question on reparations and remedies. And what we're looking at in terms of I call it transitional justice issues. And so are there issues in terms of like equality? Yes, absolutely. And I think that's something we take a look at. The impact for women is extreme right now. They're the only ones that can leave because we're under martial law. And so the women are separated from the men. They're required to try to be also the breadwinners, but also taking care of the kids and worrying about their family, and they're separated. I've seen this time around a lot of women volunteering. They haven't been conscripted, but there are a lot of female soldiers. And so it's going to be an issue that will impact Ukraine post-war, especially, and that's why we're already starting to talk about preparing for working with veterans. We have a veterans program for reintegration. How do we help that and be also gender sensitive or gender specific about how we provide the responses to that. But it will be, I think it's a really good point because it's something that we are very concerned about because of the situation of separation between families right now. There's no peace without remedy. There's no reconciliation without remedy, and it's part of our core programming. We actually have a reparations specialist, an advisor that we brought in specifically to start taking a look at how do we work more practically, because we're not OHCHR. They're the ones that are doing, taking a look at the tribunals, and then you have the things that they're working on The Hague. What we are trying to do is at the more practical level, take a look at providing support to Ukraine on the legislative reforms that are needed, taking a look at providing the practical aspects of what we call land housing and property, issues related to claims. And so we're going to be a part of that system, which helps to be able to give access to the Ukrainian population to be able to provide claims. And then for it to be connected to the registry that's already been established in The Hague. And so there's already a damages registry that's being established. And you've also heard about the warrant that's coming out for President as well. And so let's see how that works. But it's definitely in the works. I think that there will be some consequences coming out from the actions.
Thank you very much indeed. Jay, can you speak up also, please? Yeah.
My name is Wilson. Which happens to be one of the most, if not the most, latest in the first one is on the issue of volunteering, because from your explanation, volunteering and internship is a veritable platform of punching a career inside of them. So since there might not be opportunity for maybe volunteers to come over to Ukraine to volunteer due to language barrier or some other technical issues, do you have an opportunity for things like remote internship?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, analysis and trends of migration when it comes to Africa shows that displaced African people are facing worsening prospects. So I wanted to understand if IOM, apart from Ukraine. How's any current regional strategy for internally displaced people in sub-Saharan Africa, most especially people that were displaced by Boko Haram, other Islamic institutions? Do you have any regional package currently?
Thank you.
Okay, so he has a very practical question about volunteering
Yeah.
and has made a proposal of online
Yeah.
online volunteer intern. Apparently, he's very much interested in that by himself.
Yeah.
And then he's also interested in your view about the IDPs and so on in Africa, for instance. Yeah.
Thank you. So for the first one, to us, internships is a relationship, and we've tried to do some online, but it doesn't work out very well. It might help us out a little bit, but I don't feel like it helps interns get the, get the value for what they need for online internships. Now that said, our response isn't just Ukraine. It's also Slovakia, Romania, Hungary, Moldova, and Poland. And so I would try to check out for some internships or some volunteer that may be released from those countries that will get you to the border of Ukraine and be working on the Ukraine response as a whole. But I would, it's hard for us, especially as we're in the crisis mode, to be able to provide a remote internships with that. In terms of you're talking about displacements or regional strategy for sub-Saharan Africa, IOM does have that strategy. It's migration has to have a regional approach to it because it's inevitably has crossing of borders, man-made borders. Okay, that's another thing. But I'm not very well versed in it. If you're interested in knowing more, maybe get the contacts and we can provide you with some information of that. But unfortunately, I'm not well versed on that. I do have to say, because you mentioned that you're in Nigeria. Can I tell one quick story? So we were as we were evacuating out of Kiev, we found out there was because we had a lot of international students as well, and there was one international student that was unfortunately stuck. He didn't go with with the other students, and he was stuck on the wrong side of the river. And there was blockades. We were fearing that there was going to be bridges that was going to be blown if Kiev was going to be taken from the north. And the poor guy was all by himself. And so I got wind of it. And so we heard, so we found a way to be able to get him through a taxi, which we paid a lot of money for, to get him to the hotel where we were at. And we kind of somehow adopted him, and so he was, and it was such a mess in a lot of ways. So, I'm the chief of mission, but I also was the driver for the convoy out to the west. And so I always had, his name was Clinton. So I always had him with me. And it was really funny because, when the war starts, you have these informal armed groups, you have, territorial defense, and checkpoints gets popping up the whole way. And we had this, can't believe how many checkpoints there were. And you don't know, there's people with guns, you just don't know, right? And so you're trying to wear your UN badge, you're trying to, look serious. They stop everyone. But then when we come up, and so you have this Asian looking guy, and then you have a Nigerian kid, they're like, so I was joking, I said, it's one of the few times that it's an advantage to be a person of color. So anyway.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry that it doesn't apply directly to GIG, but at this university, there are students who have a high level of Russian language proficiency, maybe together with some student with proficiency of Ukrainian language too. So I have a long-term friend of mine working at IOM, or former student under my supervision working at ICC, International Criminal Court. They are very happy to work with us, especially when I recommend those volunteer students who will collect information in Russian languages. It's kind of a student type of OSINT. But they are overwhelmed by the enormous amount of work. So only if even if we just handle some open sources information in Russian language and Ukrainian language, they really appreciate it. So if there's any room like that, I'm very much happy to consult with you. Thank you very much. Now I really pick up some few questions online. Thank you very much for. Don't wait until the last time, but I will go back to. But we are running out of time. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question. You have changed your work in order to really contribute to the world. What is the skill you highlight in your career? You put it simple. I'm so sorry, but this is a simple summarized form of one question. Another thing is how do you think about the gap between needs and aid? This person who asked the question seems to be a more advanced professional. I was in Uzholt, and I managed to be engaged with Uzholt so much. And then last year, as aid worker, carried out assessment of IDP shelters and so on. So put it very simple, I'm sorry for my summary, but enormous amount of needs on the ground, especially in emergency cases. So you need to prioritize something over others. How do you do that in order to fill in the gap between needs and aid? There must be any kind of a skill that you can highlight.
Okay. Yeah. Again, in terms of needs and gaps, that is one of the hardest parts because there's much more needs than there are the ability for us to do it. And so we actually tried to work with the authorities. And so the way that Ukraine had structured it, that the governorship, the deputy governor was the humanitarian coordinator. And instead of just going, we would absolutely do our own assessments, but we would align it with the assessments that the government has because they have a strategy. You know, they want to be able to organize their community in such a way that it helps them to be able to better manage it and help. And so our focus or our priority was, for example, if our assessments looked at places and that they had the certain numbers of assessments and it overlapped, then there you have, you know, a match in a lot of ways. So then we would try to prioritize those to be able to work alongside with the government authorities to be able to be as effective as possible in terms of helping move them forward. And, you know, it's also part of a little bit of a governance piece, you know, because we're there to support the government. And so it's also important for us to help the government for the people, the population to feel that the government is actually doing something. And so as we work alongside in unison and coordinated with them, I think it's a much more effective way to do it. And it also helps with that prioritization. Skills. Passion. No, is passion a skill, Professor? I don't know.
Sure.
For me, I think the skill was that business background that I had, you know, understanding the value for money. I think I was super shy, believe it or not. I'm still a very extreme introvert. I'm going to go into my room after this and just close myself off. But you know, I think the ability to be able to communicate the issue, it's something that you all can learn. Introverted, extroverted, shy, not shy. And I think that's something that the business world taught me is to be able to communicate what is needed. And I love math, and so it was very analytical for me to take a look at the numbers, you know, the budgets and how it works, the people, and to be able to put it in a little bit more of a formula in my mind to be able to see what's needed.
Thank you very much indeed. And then find out some questions. Yonemoto-san. Hi.
I'm interested in the first settlement integration program. So you mentioned about the program. I'd like to know how does Ukraine approach host countries, society like Poland, Germany, Czech, to achieve migrant integration? And also the second question is that, like, do you personally feel the difference between the fairness of integration and Ukrainian refugees and integration of sort of non-European refugees from perspective of cultural homogeneity and in European countries? And sorry to talking too long, but what do you think are the host countries, including citizens, are required to do to get along with newcomers to achieve integration? Because I'm asking this question, because our Japanese society also need to think about this program seriously for the future.
Okay, so refugees, evacuees coming from Ukraine in neighboring countries as well as non-neighboring countries like Japan. What is the circumstance? Could I pick up one more question?
Bilateral and multilateral cooperation destination. So I will change to my second question. My experience, not many universities, students from my country, which is Vietnam and Japan, they are not very interested in the field of peace and as well as organization related to migration. So I think probably because of our generation does not really feel the change the movement of international order. Also mobilize more students in Vietnam and also Japan to be more motivated to participate or contribute to activities related to peacekeeping or migration.
She was actually brought up in Japan. I spent some amount, a good amount of time in Japan, so I only communicate with her only in Japanese language. I never seen her even speaking in English language, but let alone Vietnamese language. I'm not sure whether she can speak it. But that's the way she brings about it. So that's some, please.
Now I want So I was wondering, because I know I'm coordinating with other UN organizations that conduct similar projects to prevent the overlap. And if you do so, how does it work? And if that is, if that's not the situation, are the mandates established?
Coordination. Good. These are the final questions.
You saved the good ones. I mean, those are really difficult ones. Reintegration and resettlement with host countries. That's the big question that we're dealing with right now. Because you have, depending on who you talk to, the Europeans are saying 4 million in Europe. HCR is saying 8 million who have left. And you have also a Ukrainian government that wants all of their people back. You have a negative demographic issue in Europe. And in Europe is, I would dare say, a fairly homogenous society. And they see Ukrainians as European, right? And so there's already been a natural circular migration, labor migration process for the last 25, 30, 40 years of working. And so the attraction also with the fact that the longer that they're staying under temporary protection, and as kids become more and more integrated, the less likely they'll want to come home. And so you have this really interesting kind of this complex situation that's contradictory. You know, there's a pull potentially to stay. There's a push, you know, from the other side to get people back. And so what we've been talking a lot about is I was talking to the professor about this is we can't just have this basic approach towards integration. It's you're either integrated or you're not, but maybe we start talking about this concept called dual intent, right? That you're making sure that you're providing assistance for the person who's going to be there for the next 3 years to feel that they're part of the community, working with the community so that they have this understanding where there's no friction, because services may be different than the others, you know, but also creating skills in such a way that it's going to be productive for when the person may want to come back. And it has to do with reskilling. It has to do with certification of qualifications You know, will Ukraine recognize the vocation certificate in Germany? And can that person come back and do that? And so integration becomes a really bigger issue that we're trying to tackle with Europe and Ukraine together. Is and that's why we're also working at the community level, because we want to make sure that those who are coming home feel that they actually have a space to live, services, and employment. And so that's the big question that we're really trying to tackle right now. In fact, we're having a workshop with the government and ministerial workshop about that exactly. And we're always cautious about host country, because I think there are some countries or some family, systems already in place. They're getting a little bit tired. The feeling of warmth is over. How much longer are we going to have these evacuees in our house? 5 more years? Well, maybe that's a little too much. We were just thinking 2 weeks. Yeah, and so those are the issues that we need to take a look at. In terms of fairness, I think that's the big issue right now. Ukraine has taken so much of the hue of the attention. We have in IOM, I think we have 6 other emergencies. You have Ethiopia, you have Somalia, you have South Sudan, you've got all of these other places that are, Turkey, that are in dire need, and yet the criticism has been most of the aid has been shifting more towards Ukraine, and the openness has been, unfortunately or fortunately, we also have to understand the context. This is middle of Europe, that this crisis is happening, and this war will impact the geopolitically Europe and other countries. And so that's why, or maybe that there's so much focus on it, on both the humanitarian and on the development side. Fair or not fair, So I'll stop there at that. The question on youth is really interesting. Who was asking about that in terms of engagement of the young people towards understanding? I mean, that's what education is about, I feel that this is where it's the responsibilities of the professors to help guide and educate the youth to understanding the value of your generation. It's a very interesting generation from what I've read. My daughter has been teaching me about it too, in terms of, there's this balance between me and the outside world, and maybe what's important, and this is where education and knowledge would help to actually expand the fact that we're all interconnected and we have a responsibility to the world. I was so proud when my 11-year-old daughter was explaining to me what sustainable development was. I was like, so the schools are helping, the educational system is helping with that. And this is why I'm worried about this lost generation in Ukraine. They may not get that exposure. They may not get that classical or that academic training to be able to apply what they have. In Ukraine, we were talking about this. Youth is a very important part of our programming. We don't have a pillar on it. It's we call it cross-cutting. In everything we do, we consider youth, because it's so important and it's so integral for the development of the country. Is this generation, and so we are trying to do civic engagement with the youth. We're trying to make sure that the youth feel like they have a voice. Little silly things in high school about motto UN or something like that. It actually does help, and so I hope that those models continue, and I hope that the professors have the passion to be able to teach, and I hope that you listen. So that's all I can say about that.
You don't have to listen. Speak.
Or speak, yes, you're right. Did I miss something else? Coordination. Oh, yes. It's very easy in Ukraine. There is so much work. There is no overlap. Okay. Now, the problem is that agencies have bigger appetites than what they can chew. And so my biggest thing is if you want to take it on, you better have the ability to implement, right? Coordination is not, or mandate is not that this is ours. It's about leading. And we're happy to have agencies lead on certain parts. If you're going to lead, you take the leadership. If you're going to say you're going to do something, you better do it, because you're talking about lives, not about politics and multilateralism and, you know, my mandate, your mandate, you know, and so maybe I'm sorry for being so direct on this. I'm very passionate about that because it impacts the lives of people. It's not a game that we play in New York, you know, and so I welcome leadership from other agencies, and we work pretty well together, but there is so much need in Ukraine. I don't care who does it. You know, if another agency gets all of the Japanese funding, great. Please do something about it, you know? And that's why we're working on with private sector, because we know that we need more than just ODA funds, you know? We need investments. We need other things.
Okay, now, thank you very much indeed. Like a friendly press, and now we got engaged with our students, but you really showed your great level of passion. We all felt about the high level of passion and the skill he exerted to show his passion to you. Without the skill to show your passion is not very much utilized. It's a hidden treasure. But he has passion as well as the skill to express it. So we all learn from these passion as well as the skill and so on. Thank you very much indeed for your kindest engagement with us. Thank you very much indeed.